So everybody look around at the hands. That's about 1 in 7. The average person with one autoimmune disease will develop 6 more in their lifetime if they don't figure out why it's there. And the average person with autoimmune disease will shave about 10 years off of their life if they don't figure out why it's there. Autoimmune disease kills more people than cancer, heart disease combined. People don't realize that because in the autoimmune realm, we split the diseases. Cancer, we clump them together. In heart disease, we clump them together, right? When we're doing cancer statistics, if you die from lung cancer, if you die from bone cancer, you're clumped in the same cancer category. But in autoimmune disease, you're not clumped in the same category. There's 90 different recognized forms of autoimmune disease. And research is now showing that type 2 diabetes is a form of autoimmune disease and that heart disease is a form of autoimmune disease. So it's much more prevalent than what we think, and we think that the mechanisms are largely responsible for the vast majority of chronic deaths in the civilized world, not in third world countries, but in America, Great Britain, Europe, etc. So we're going to talk about those mechanisms tonight. And what I want you to walk away with this evening is the knowledge not just on what are the mechanisms, because if you understand why autoimmune disease exists and why it occurs, then now you can seek out experts and opinions and advice and guidance around hope as opposed to despair, right? How many of you that have been told, let's ask another question, how many of you that have been told you have autoimmune disease have been told you need to be on this medication for the rest of your life? Raise your hand really high. And how many of your doctor says, we don't know what causes autoimmune disease, but it's probably just genetics and family history, and you're just going to have to get over it? How many of you have had that conversation? Raise your hand really high. So we're going to talk about how that's false. That's what I like to call poppycock. So what is autoimmune disease? According to the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, autoimmune disease is an illness that causes the immune system to produce antibodies that attack normal body tissues. Autoimmune is when your body attacks itself, it sees a part of your body or a process as a disease and tries to combat it. I can argue that definition, but that's coming from the leading experts, right? It's coming directly from them. Now, if we look at autoimmune disease statistics, in America, an estimated 50 million Americans have autoimmune disease, compared to 9 million with cancer and 22 million with heart disease. Autoimmune disease is the #1 cause of death in women under the age of 65. There are more than 100 forms of autoimmune disease currently recognized by research. This number changes every year because as every year goes by, we learn there's a disease we already knew about that has an autoimmune mechanism. Symptoms cross many specialties and can affect all body organs. Medical education provides minimal learning about autoimmune disease. Specialists are generally unaware of interrelationships among the different autoimmune diseases. I said earlier that the average person with autoimmune disease, if they don't figure out why they have it, they'll develop 6 more. And that 6 more is not necessarily going to be in the same organ system. So if you, for example, have autoimmune heart disease, you could develop autoimmune thyroid disease, and that you could develop autoimmune bone disease. Osteoporosis is an autoimmune disease that was discovered and published in the New England Journal of Medicine about 10 years ago. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's not a calcium deficiency. Yeah. So initial symptoms are often intermittent and unspecific until the disease becomes acutely either life-threatening or life-altering. And research is generally disease-specific and limited in scope because research is generally disease-specific. And autoimmune disease is a process, and really it's not fair to call autoimmune disease 90 or 100 separate diseases. Autoimmune disease is not a disease. I don't even like to think of it that way. I like to think of it as a process. Because if you have the right process going on in your body, you have the potential to develop autoimmune disease in any tissue, any organ, or any system. So this is just a short list of examples. And I'm not going to harp on this slide. And so those of you who stay to the very end, I'm gonna give you guys a number you can text, and we'll get you the entire slide deck of tonight's presentation. So we'll make sure that you get this before the night's over. So what many of you have been told is that the cause of autoimmune disease is unknown, and there's nothing you can do except take your medicine. What many of you have been told is that diet and food and nutrition has nothing to do with autoimmunity. There's no such thing as leaky gut. Who in here has heard of leaky gut? Well, if you heard Tom O'Brien talk, I know you've heard of leaky gut. The chemicals and pesticides used in food production are safe. Right? What's wrong with the little poison every day for the rest of your life? That sunshine is dangerous, and that not getting vaccinated is dangerous and irresponsible. So, before I go any further, I want to share a story with you, because this is kind of the common theme or the common conversation that happens between patients and doctors. It's so common. I actually got my start in this arena. I was working as an attending in the VA hospital in Houston in the field of rheumatology. And I'm a veteran of the Air Force, and we were treating these veterans, you know, my fellow combat veterans, and these guys were coming through, these gals were coming through. They were being drugged so that their symptoms would go away, but their quality of life was terrible. They felt terrible. Their hair was falling out. Their skin was drying up. They had less pain, but they didn't have no pain. Many of them advanced from walking to walkers to wheelchairs because their joints were slowly being eaten alive despite the use of the medications that they were being put on. And many of them actually started to develop other diseases as a result of being on the medications. You know, steroids can cause lupus, right? And methotrexate can cause folic acid deficiency that can lead to cancer. And Enbrel and some of the other disease-modifying antirheumatics can cause lymphoma. So we've got these people who have served our country, who are in the system, who are being told all of these things, and none of them are getting better. And the day that happens that their joint is so deteriorated that they can no longer function, the surgeon is right there for the surgical consult to do what? To replace the joint. Now, take these people with autoimmune disease who've been hammered for 20 years with very powerful immune-suppressing medications and drugs that cause nutritional deficiency, and they can't heal. And so now we're going to rip them open and shove metal in their body and sew them back together and hope that they heal, right? Well, there's something called failed surgery syndrome, which was a very, very common finding, or a very, very common after the fact with these individuals. So a lot of them, their surgeries would fail. They still, even though they had their knees replaced, they still couldn't walk. They couldn't rehab out of it because they were so distraught and so damaged, they couldn't heal from the surgery. And I didn't see that that was where I wanted to be for the rest of my career, right? Seeing people come in and appeasing pain so that they could have their joints replaced and then not be able to heal and have a miserable life all through that process. So I'm a researcher at heart, and so I went, in Houston we have a library called the Jesse Jones Medical Library. It's one of the biggest medical libraries in the country. And so I did extensive research on autoimmune disease, and I found that there was a form of autoimmune disease that we already knew about, and we knew what caused it. How many of you have heard of celiac disease? So celiac disease, autoimmune disease of the small intestine. It's caused by what? Yeah, no grain, no pain. So it's caused by gluten, and we knew that. We already knew that. So we had a model of autoimmune disease that was very well established in medical literature, that we knew what caused it. And so the first logical thought process for any young doctor, in my opinion, should have been, well, if we know the cause of one, why don't we apply it in the others and just see what happens, right? Maybe it'll work, and if it doesn't, we haven't lost anything. So I took that to my attending physicians, and I was laughed at. So then I went back to the drawing board, and I did more research, and I found that in rheumatological disease, you could put pain in remission in 48 hours through fasting. And this was very well published. This was published in major medical journals, journals of rheumatology. And so I brought a stack of literature to my attendings and said, don't ignore me this time, because this is directly with what we're dealing with. We're dealing with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and scleroderma and dermatomyositis and ankylosing spondylitis and spondyloarthritis and psoriatic arthritis. And this research says if you fast these patients, their pain goes away. I was told to quit investigating. So then I brought back more research. Tenacity. And this research showed that using high doses of fish oil, 3 to 6 grams a day, was more effective than nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs at minimizing pain in people with autoimmune arthritis. And I said, okay, you don't want to fast them. You don't want to put them on a gluten-free diet. There's prescription fish oil. You know, maybe we can take 10 people and set them aside and we can do this trial. I was promptly told no. And I realized at that point that if I stayed there, my soul would have been slowly crushed, and I would have been as miserable as the attending physician was who was there. He was one of the most miserable people I'd ever met. He was very caring. He was very caring, and he was trained rheumatologist, and he was trained in rheumatology, but he was trained to dispense drugs. He was trained to mask symptoms. He was not trained to help people cure or heal their disease. And so and I want to be very clear because I'm not anti-medicine. You know, sometimes my message comes across as anti-medicine. I think we have the best acute care system in the world. But we have the worst chronic care system in the world. Okay? So when it comes to doing the same thing repetitively and expecting a different outcome, what is that usually? Insanity, right? Craziness. And that's where I was. And so here these people who were veterans. They were getting sicker and sicker and sicker, not getting better. So I left. I said, I can't do this for the next 40 years and be like you. I don't want to be like you because you're not a happy person. Imagine going through 40 years in your career and everybody you're trying to help doesn't get better. So it wasn't his fault. It was his resistance to change, but it wasn't his fault. That's the way he was trained, and that's what rheumatology is. So those of you who are going to a doctor who's trained in traditional medicine, understand that you're going to a medical doctor who's probably going to give you a diagnosis and dispense medications. So don't be mad at them for not understanding this. They didn't train here. Does that make sense? So I want to be very clear. This is not an anti-medicine conversation that I want to have. So one of my first patients in practice, when I went out on my own, I said I'm leaving, and I went out on my own, was a little girl. Now, this little girl was 9 years old, but from the age of about 2, from the early on when these foods were introduced into her diet, she struggled and struggled and struggled. Her knees would flare up to the size of softballs. She couldn't crawl as a child. She couldn't play in the playground. She had a permanent IV embedded into her arm because she was in and out of the hospital so frequently to administer antibiotics and pain medications. So they drugged her, and they drugged her, and they drugged her. And one day, now imagine being a parent, and one day you go in to your doctor who's been treating your daughter for the last 8 years, and they say, Mrs. Jones, you need to go home and get things in order. There's nothing more we can do for her. She's got about 6 months. Her name was Ginger, and her mom brought her in to see me. And what pisses me off is that I was the last doctor she came to, not the first. Because she had years of suffering. Imagine a young child that didn't have a childhood that suffered through the entire thing. All because we have a system that's resistant to these common sense truths. So Ginger was gluten sensitive. That was one of the first things that we applied with her. Genetically, we tested her. She had the genetics for gluten sensitivity, so we removed gluten from her diet. But she was also allergic to blueberries. And you know what her mom was giving her every morning? A blueberry smoothie. And rightfully, because blueberries are what? They're a superfood, right? Everybody talks about how blueberries are a superfood. So here she's giving her daughter a blueberry smoothie and feeding her all types of grains, whole grains, right? Whole grain cereals. And her daughter's dying. So we ran tests. We determined what she was reacting to. And we removed those things from her diet. And within a matter of 6 months, the IV was out of her arm and her knees hadn't swollen. Today, she's graduated college. That's the power of changing the paradigm of that conversation. So I would just, as you walk away tonight, never, ever, ever let them tell you this, because it's wrong. So the current system is diagnostic-centric. Give it a name. Why do we give it a name? To treat it. So we give it a code. It's called an ICD-10 code. It used to be called an ICD-9 code, and before that an 8, etc. But do you know who owns the ICD-10 code book? The American Medical Association. It's one of their largest sources of revenue. Yeah. Making that code book and creating numbers for diseases is one of their largest sources of revenue. And why do we give it a name? We give it a name so that we can give it a drug. Because, see, to treat a disease, you have to give it a name so that you can then plug in the medication that matches the name. The FDA-approved medication that matches the name, right? That's how insurance covers the cost. I asked the question very simply. I know there's a lot of heated debate right now over, health care, right? I don't have a problem with people having access to health care. What I have a problem is people having access to health care that kills them. And the taxpayer foots that bill because the criteria is a naming game. And when we give something a name, I've heard a few people here tonight just in listening, some people saying, I have this disease or I have that disease. And and this is not to pick on anybody, I just want to shift your mindset, is that when you own your disease, it owns you. So by giving it a name and saying there's nothing we can do other than medicate you, what are we really doing? Is we're creating a victim status. We're making you a victim of an illness that you can now do nothing about and you have no power over it. And what is that? When you have no power over changing something in your life, what do we call that? What's another term for that? Hopelessness. So the treatment of symptoms with chemicals, no thought goes into patient empowerment. It goes into patient hopelessness, not empowerment. So empowerment comes with knowledge, right? In diet and lifestyle change, the vast majority of diseases that people suffer from in this country today could be altered with these two very simple things. So the focus is also lifelong disease management, not disease curation, not trying to cure it. We're just managing the symptoms. There are no cures, but there are. We're just not allowed to say it. If doctors like me say there's a cure, guess what happens? They drag me into court. You can't say that there's a cure for that disease. Okay, we're not going to call it a cure. If their symptoms are all gone, what do we call it? We'll say that it's temporarily in remission because it's a medical miracle or mystery. How about that? I'm okay with 10,000 medical mysteries of people being healthy and happy and moving on with life. So the problem's getting worse. We look at autoimmune disease. Look at the rising incidence of autoimmune disease from 1950. And this is just select diseases. But look at that curve. You get to about 1970, and it really just wallops right up. Now, I'm going to show you some things here shortly that are going to give you an idea of why this is happening, because that's what I want you to know. If you're empowered with this information, you can save yourself. So there are scientifically recognized central mechanisms involved in autoimmune disease. Too much hygiene. How many of you here have heard of the hygiene hypothesis? We've got just a few hands, so good. I'm going to teach you guys something tonight. It's not going to be all rhetoric, new stuff, or old stuff. Molecular mimicry. How many of you have heard of molecular mimicry? We're going to talk about that too. What about intestinal hyperpermeability? Leaky gut. Now, I know Dr. Tom was here, so I know he talked about leaky gut, probably talked about leaky brain. Did he? Did he talk about leaky brain? No. Oh, yes, he did. Okay. I figured he would. His new book is all about the brain. If you don't have a copy of his new book, you should get it. So leaky gut is pre-autoimmunity. Just for those of you who, you've heard the term pre-diabetes, right? Leaky gut is pre-autoimmunity. Now, I want to be clear. Leaky gut that is chronically present and doesn't go away is pre-autoimmunity. Leaky gut itself is actually a normal mechanism. The gut opens and closes all the time. If you were to go out today and do a very aggressive workout, you would have leaky gut for about an hour after the workout. When you eat really piping hot food, you have leaky gut temporarily. Now, there are certain things that can cause leaky gut and turn leaky gut on for very long periods of time. Infection can do it. What else can cause leaky gut? Eating around the clock. What's the name of that book that one doctor wrote that was here tonight? Grain. Grain can cause leaky gut. No grain, no pain. All right, so leaky gut, chronic leaky gut that doesn't shut off is pre-autoimmunity. Intestinal, you're going to hear this term hyperpermeability. If you want to get your doctor to listen to you, don't go in and ask him about leaky gut because he's going to dismiss it. Even though the researcher that discovered leaky gut and really is credited for this is a Harvard researcher, Alessio Fasano. He's an MD. And a lot of doctors, GI doctors will tell you there's no such thing as leaky gut. But we've known about leaky gut for 20 years. So if you really want to start the conversation, use this word right here, intestinal hyperpermeability. Doctor, I think I have intestinal hyperpermeability. He'll probably look at you like, scratch his head. No. So 70-80% of the immune system's in the gut. And that's a very important number because what happens if your gut has microscopic holes? Your food, the proteins in your food, the chemicals that you eat are in your food, the bacterial toxins, the fungal toxins or yeast toxins, all those little things now have access, instead of being quarantined in your gut. Remember, what's your gut's job? Your job of your gut is to be a quarantined zone. Your gut says, keep everything in the tube, right? It does not have access to your bloodstream. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to separate the good from the bad. It doesn't matter how healthy or how super your food is. There's bad in everything that you eat. And your gut's job is to separate good from bad. So I'm known as the gluten-free warrior, but your gut is your warrior. It is battling for you every meal to keep you safe. And that's why 70% of your immune system is behind it, in case something happens, in case it breaks, in case there's a fail-safe that needs to be instituted or implemented. So you get microscopic holes in your gut, it's going to go straight to the GALT. GALT stands for gastro-associated lymphoid tissue. And it's a lot like tonsils. You all know what tonsils are, right? Those two big clumps of tissue in the back of your throat. What are they? They're immune tissue. You ever get sick, they get swollen, right? Sometimes they get stuff packed in them, white blood cells and pus when you get sick. Well, you've got tonsils that wrap around your small intestine, and they represent about 70% of your entire immune system. So these are some of the known causes of leaky gut. Potatoes. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying nobody here should ever eat a potato. I'm not saying that nobody here should ever have a potato or could never have a potato. But you want to know, if potatoes are a staple in your diet and you're struggling with chronic illness and you have leaky gut, it's not going to go away if you keep potatoes in your diet as a staple. Food allergies. It's one of the reasons, it's one of the fundamental things that any functional medicine doctor is going to test for. We want to know what you should or shouldn't be eating so that we can seal and heal your gut. Excuse me. Gluten. Particularly when I say gluten, I don't probably mean what most other doctors think about as gluten, because the formal definition of gluten is not gluten, it's alpha-gliadin. Alpha-gliadin is one type of gluten found only in wheat, barley, and rye. There are about 1,000 forms of gluten. It's really, we shouldn't even say gluten, we should say glutens, because it's plural. Wheat alone has more than 100 forms of gluten. There was a research group in Australia in 2010 that discovered 400 new forms of gluten. Okay? And so understand that gluten is a family of proteins, not a singular thing. And this family of proteins, they all look very similar. So when your immune system starts reacting to one gluten, it tends to react to them all. And I write about that. Those of you who came up and got your book signed, I write about that extensively in the book. But gluten, or glutens, can cause leaky gut. Genetically modified food and pesticides, Plastics. Shouldn't even be drinking out of this cup, but because I very rarely do it, I'm not so worried. But the plastics are known to trigger leaky gut. So you should be drinking on a regular basis. Where you should be getting most of your drinking is from glass or stainless steel that's not from China, because we don't know what's in China's stainless steel. As a matter of fact, they've had a number of lead recalls in the last few years with a lot of their products. Pesticides, aggressive exercise, medication. Antibiotics is one of them, but so are non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Do you know that aspirin, baby aspirin, can cause leaky gut? Baby aspirin is about 80 milligrams. It only takes 7.5 milligrams of aspirin to rip a hole in your stomach and small intestine. Yeah. Only 7.5. Infections can cause leaky gut. So what does leaky gut damage do? Number one, it overstimulates the immune system. If you look here in this diagram, this is a very rudimentary drawing of the cells that line the gut. So these kind of columnar-shaped cells, you see these little 3 lines here? It's a little dark on the screen, but those are what are called tight junctions, okay? Those little there. These tight junctions are like Lego snaps. You ever play with Lego blocks? You have the prong and it snaps into, the male part snaps into the female part, right? That's what these are like. It's what seals these cells together. If there's no tight junction, then you get a leak, a microscopic pore, if you will. So all the stuff on this side, the bacteria, the food, the stuff that's in the food, now can come right through without being properly vetted. Remember what your gut's supposed to do. It's a quarantined zone. It's supposed to vet good from bad and allow good in and poop bad out. That's its function. So chemicals and toxins can access your bloodstream. That can create hyperimmune abnormalities. That leads to increased food allergy. Oftentimes, if you have a chronic leaky gut, the things you eat the most of are the things you start reacting to. And that's why Ginger was allergic to blueberries. That's why she wasn't going to get fully better until we figured that out. But that leads to autoimmune pain. Because when you're reacting to your food, what's the purpose of food? Nourishment. Okay, so now, this is the opposite of nourishment. Instead of your food providing nourishment, it's providing an extraneous strain on your body's resources. Now your body is having to combat what it's supposed to be receiving nourishment from. It's the opposite of eating. You do that for 20 years, and this can get quite significant. It can get quite severe. So, bacterial and viral toxins can access the central circulation. This can cause allergic hypersensitivity to foods and sets the stage for molecular mimicry. Now, I mentioned this earlier, and now I'm going to tell you what it is. Let's say that the bacteria that's in your GI tract, excuse me, and we have just as many bacterial cells in our gut as we have human cells. It's a 1-to-1. Some people say 20-to-1, but that's not true. It's 1-to-1 ratio of human cells to bacterial cells. So you have just as many bacteria. You are just as much bacteria as you are human. It's a symbiotic relationship. As a matter of fact, in the world of gastroenterology, the microbiome, which is what I'm referring to, is about to be classified as a human organ. Now think about that as far as the capacity for taking an antibiotic, because an antibiotic can disrupt the microbiome for up to 2 years. So it's like having a surgical removal of an organ through a pill. And how many kids do you know that go back to the doctor every other month for an antibiotic? Right? So, molecular mimicry. Molecular mimicry is when some of those toxins are similar in shape and structure to your own tissues. So let's say one of those bacterial toxins. I'll give you an example of an actual bacterial toxin that can cause hashimoto's. How many of you here have hypothyroidism, hashimoto's? So listen to this part. There's a type of bacterial infection called Klebsiella. And Klebsiella produces a toxin that looks like your thyroid. And so if this is the stage we're playing on, leaky gut, that bacterial toxin leaks into your bloodstream. And remember what I said on that last slide? Right here, 70-80% of the immune system's in the gut. So it starts to leak in. The immune system starts to attack it because it sees it as foreign. But it looks like your thyroid. So then, 5 years goes by, a decade goes by, it starts looking at your thyroid and it says, you know what? The thyroid gland looks like that bacterial toxin. Maybe we should just start attacking it too. That's molecular mimicry. It's when the molecule being secreted by the microorganism or from the toxin that you're being exposed to looks like you and triggers an autoimmune response. It's not your immune system that's broken. See, this is why I said I could argue that original definition of autoimmune disease. It's not your immune system that's broken. Your immune system is working perfectly well. It's protecting you. It's this that's broken. It's the assault on the gut that leads to the problem. So that's molecular mimicry. Again, one of the primary intrinsic mechanisms that begins this process. So it's linked to an abnormal microbiome, meaning if you have an abnormal microbiome, you're more prone to leaky gut. And this is the problem with chronic antibiotic use. If you're going to get, this is the best piece of advice I could give you is, if you're ever faced with needing an antibiotic, unless you're in a hospital and you're going to die from sepsis, get a culture first. Because if you're just in a routine doctor's office visit and you got the sniffles, tell them to culture you. Tell them, I want a culture and sensitivity test. You guys know what that is? They can culture you. They can detect whether or not there's a bacteria or fungus, because most upper respiratory infections are not bacterial, they're fungal. So taking the antibiotic doesn't do anything but make the fungal infection stronger. That's why you go home, you get worse, you come back, you get another antibiotic, and you just keep playing that game. So a culture and sensitivity. What the sensitivity part of the culture means that you can, if it's an infection, if it's a bacterial infection, they can actually test to see which antibiotic will kill it best. We have that technology. And every hospital has that technology. You just have to ask for it. Most doctors won't order it. Why? I don't know that your insurance is going to cover that, Mrs. Jones. We shouldn't probably order it because that'll lead to an audit, and then I'll have a lot of paperwork to do for your insurance company. That's the way the game works. Is the doctors do have some of the technology, but sometimes they're scared to use it because they're scared they're going to get an audit because there's so much red tape and there's so much garbage they have to go through just to keep their doors open. And it's not their fault that the system is that way. It's just what it's evolved to. So, the inflammation of the GI tract can cause leaky gut. So what causes inflammation of the gut? What causes inflammation in the gut? Infection can cause it. Eating the wrong food can cause it. Eating junk food, hydrogenated fat, eating too much sugar, yeast overgrowth. There are a lot of different things that can cause inflammation of the gut. There's 3 rules I like to give people because these things, well, the first 2 rules are free. The third one might cost you a little bit, but the first 2 are free. Rule number 1, you cannot get healthy eating food that is not healthy. Free. Epiphany, right? It really is, though. Now, you think about that. Well, let's think about how our culture has allowed for the social engineering of the celebration of killing ourselves with food. Now, it's not that our culture did that on purpose. It's all these things happen over a trend of time, right? Go back to the Great Depression. I'm a big student of history. You go back to the Great Depression. What I grew up with, what my parents used to always say is, clean your plate, there are starving kids in Africa. Anybody ever hear that before? Okay. Okay, so eat as much as you can, as fast as you can, okay, because 2 parents that are working, they're tired when they get home, and somebody had to cook dinner, and so they're tired and cranky, and they want you to eat as fast as you can and get in bed, but they also need you to clean your plate. That's social engineering. In a sense, it is, because it's created an environment of how we eat. See, part of this is not just what we eat, but it's how we eat. See, eating is something that occurs in the realm, or it's supposed to occur in the realm of relaxation. There's 2 sides to your nervous system. There's sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight. It's the one when you're go, 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 go. All right? It's the one that caffeine ramps up. And then there's the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the one that yoga and Tai Chi and meditation and prayer and calm, sanity in your life, like keep that part of your nervous system working. But that part of your nervous system is responsible for not allowing this to happen. Now, how many people have hardcore pedal-to-the-metal lives? Most. So they're already at a disadvantage. It's the way socially, we've just been driven to go in America. And we don't take the time to relax and eat. We inhale our food. When I was in the military, I was what they called the dorm chief. And so I was the last one into the cafeteria, to the mess hall, but I had to be the first one out. So what would happen for months is I learned to inhale my food. It's amazing I'm not sicker than I am. But I got home after 4 years of service. I got home, and I'd go home for the holidays, and I was just done. And everybody was still eating. I had to train myself to slow it down and actually chew again. But we've got to understand that in society today, we have all of these social engineered holidays, family gatherings, where everybody's preparing food, right? And going back to the Great Depression again, what happened during the Great Depression? We almost starved, right? The reason why grain is subsidized, you guys know about grain subsidies? Like all the crummy, pesticide-loaded, genetically modified swill that's being produced is being produced by your tax dollars. And then it's being used to help people who can't afford food. So we're feeding the people who can't afford it the stuff that's going to definitely make them sick so that we can set them up for a healthcare system that will also pay for the healthcare that won't heal them. It's a lose situation. Who's going to win in that environment? No one. So we have to understand that that's happening, because the way that we can make a change is through empowered knowledge. So we had this Great Depression that led to a famine for a large part of the country, and many people starved. And so the people our parents and grandparents that came from that said, there's starving kids in China, there's starving kids in Africa, clean your plate. Right? And there was no thought as to whether it was healthy or not. And what was happening at the same time is that grain was being subsidized, and because it was taxpayer dollars, farmers were growing more of it and more of it and more of it as quickly as they could, as unethically as they could, because they were getting a paycheck to do it. And then what happened? Cereal was invented. And cereal, which didn't exist before 1895, people don't realize that. They think it's such a cultural thing that cereal is like, it's been around forever. Tony the Tiger, right? The Lucky Charms guy, I don't even know what is his name, right? The Boo Berry, right? All those cartoon characters, all that manipulative marketing was aimed at children to create a generation of kids who believed that cereal was what you were supposed to eat. And did you know that in 1943, the United States government banned the sale of processed grain, said it was illegal? You cannot sell it because 8,000 people a year were dying from eating it. You know that the reason when you pick up a loaf of bread or a box of cereal and you look on the back of it and it says fortified with, and you'll see thiamine and niacin. It's because thiamine is vitamin B1. Thiamine deficiency causes beriberi. It can kill you. Niacin deficiency is vitamin B3. It causes pellagra. It can kill you. So the government said no more unless you fortify it. So then what did the cereal companies do? They fortified it, but what did they really do? They came out with cartoon characters. And they said, cornflakes, rich in protein, right? They made it sexy, right? And they said, now it's fortified. That's right. So it's even better for you. And that was the message. That was the message to parents everywhere. That was the message to children. Children got the message of this is fun and this is normal. Parents got the message of this is what you should be feeding your kids. And so then generations of children were raised on cereal, right? And so from about 1950, remember that curve I showed you? Autoimmune disease? Took right off. So that's one connection I want you to see. So what causes autoimmune disease? We have one model of autoimmune disease. I mentioned this earlier. Everybody knows it. Everybody agrees on it. There are no arguments, and that is celiac disease. And we know that gluten causes it. We are 100% sure. But the truth of the matter is that even celiac disease is not 100%. Because did you know that a parasite can cause celiac disease? Yeah. Did you know that corn can cause celiac disease? Did you know that soy can cause celiac disease? Did you know that blood pressure medications can cause celiac disease? So now we're not even sure. My point is this. We don't look for one thing. We don't look for a magic bullet. There's no such thing as a magic bullet. Autoimmune disease is multifactorial. We've got food, nutrition. We've got chemicals in food. We've got air quality. We've got water quality to think about. We've got infectious diseases, infectious microorganisms. We've got medical interventions that are commonplace, that have also been socially engineered to be the norm, even though they shouldn't be. We've got lack of sunshine and the celebration of staying inside because you'll get skin cancer if you go outside and play. God forbid you go get some sunshine. And then we have lack of sleep, artificial light sources, technology keeping people alive and awake, but not healthy. And then they use caffeine, right, to stay awake during the day, and then it keeps them awake at night. They never calm down. And we have excessive stress, relationship stress, work stress, life purpose, time management, you name it. Lack of physical activity. When you're a kid, you go to school for 8 hours a day, and they say, oh, well, gym is less important than school. We're going to give 30 minutes to play, and we're going to give 7.5 hours to keeping your young son in a chair, miserable out of his mind, okay? And then we're going to send him home with 4 hours of homework, as if that makes sense. This should be equal to education. Physical education. Know yourself. Know your body. Know how it works. Know how it moves. Be a master of how it moves. So, big fancy word. Phenotypic expression equals you plus your gene interaction. What I'm about to tell you may be the first time you hear it for some of you, and it may not be for some of you, but I want you to walk away. If you don't walk away with anything else tonight, I want you to walk away understanding this diagram. You've got genes. We all do, right? Now, are genes good or bad? Genes are a gift. They're not bad. Even in cases where you have somebody who's born with genetic disease like cystic fibrosis, neurofibromatoma, diseases like Down syndrome, you still have a life. It's still a gift. For those of you who are spiritual, genes are a gift from God. For those of you who are not, genes are a gift from your ancestors. And you're alive because you have the best genes of anyone ever, or you wouldn't be here. So when a doctor has the conversation with you and says, you have bad genes, he's wrong. And all the scientists, pretty much all scientists agree that it isn't your genes that dictates illness at all. It's what you do with them. Pop quiz. What happens if you jump off a cliff? A, you'll fly. B, you'll fall to your death. B is a pretty obvious answer. You may fly for a minute. You're right, both. Trick question. So, what happens if you go underwater and try to breathe? A, you'll grow gills. B, you'll choke and drown. My point is, it's easy to understand those obvious examples, right? If you put your genes in an environment that's acutely dangerous, then you'll have an acute scenario that it's very easy to understand. But what's harder to understand than what a lot of doctors understand is when you put your genes in an environment that is a slow poison every day. A slow poison every day. Remember that your body's not going to lie over and die. It does adapt. It is resilient. Do you know what disease is? Disease isn't a problem that's gone wrong. Disease is when your body has lost its capacity to adapt. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where doctors refer to you and they say, you have this disease, we don't know why. What they should be saying is you're doing a lot of the things that you should be doing wrong. We need to figure out what those are. because your body can no longer adapt to your choices. Your choices have slowly poisoned you to the point where you're sick and you're non-functional. So think of genes like a light switch. The light switch is a light switch. Turns the light on, turns the light off, right? If it's got a dimmer switch, you can kind of ramp it up slowly or ramp it down slowly. I'm going to give you another analogy. If you're a diabetic and all you do is sit around and eat sugar, your genes will turn on to produce more insulin. Your genes will adapt to your choice. If they didn't, you would die. Right? You'd go into a diabetic coma and die. The disease is not the fault of your genes. Your genes are keeping you alive. The symptoms of pain and hormone dysfunction are your body's early warning signs. Your body is screaming at you saying, change. And if we suppress it through chemical means, what are we doing? We're creating a scenario where we create a false sense of confidence in a patient to continue to allow them to make the same bad choices that got them in the office in the first place. So are we serving them, or are we just prolonging their doom? Think of it like this: if you've got kids, or if you've got a friend who's an alcoholic, do you hand them, when they're having withdrawals, do you say, here's a fifth of Jack. I see that you got the shakes and the jimmies. We're going to fix that right up. Here's a fifth of Jack, and you'll be smooth in no time. Is that what you do to an alcoholic? Well, we call alcoholism a disease, don't we? So why do we chemically manipulate people to suppress their ability to warn themselves to make a change? No one ever got sick due to drug deficiency, ever. Now, that being said, I can only think of one drug in the entire world that cures disease. It's the antibiotic. It saves lives. You go into the hospital with sepsis or an infection, an antibiotic will save your life. But every other class of medicine, no. They artificially manipulate chemistry to appease the person's symptoms. Symptom management is not disease resolution, and it never will be. And no matter how many billions of dollars we throw at it with taxpayer-funded money to make sure people can get health care, they're not getting health care. What are they getting? They're getting poisoned more. So your genes won't change. The nature of what your genes do, they turn on or turn off based on these three triangles. Your choices, your chemical choices, your emotional, spiritual choices, and your physical choices. Those are the things that you can do every day that will influence the behavior of your genetic code. In science, we call that epigenetics. You can take somebody with a father who died in their 50s of a heart attack, and if you know why these things were wrong with that man, his son doesn't have to repeat his father's mistake. Because where was heart disease in 1910? There wasn't even there was no such thing as a cardiologist. There wasn't enough heart disease. Margarine came on the scene in 1910, and that's when we started to see all the heart disease. All these things we talked about on that last slide are choices that you get to make every day. And nobody's going to be perfect. Nobody's going to be able to make perfect choices. You're not ever going to be able to walk outside and say, there's zero pollution in the air, perfect, right? You can walk through a pine forest and breathe in carcinogens that are natural. So it's not just man-made that we're worried about. See, what we're after is we're after making really intelligent choices consistently for who we are, so that we activate our genes, so that our genes are expressing in a manner that expresses resiliency, adaptability, good health. See, health is on a scale. There's a spectrum. How many of you in this room are perfect? Raise your hand. Oh, I got one in the back. Okay. I'm going to call you out. I got two. Okay, so y'all just ignore this part because you already know everything I'm about to say. No. So perfection is one end of the spectrum, and it's irrelevant because no one here is and no one will ever be. The other end of the spectrum is death. And you're all in this room alive, so that's irrelevant too. So you're all somewhere between death and perfection. Right? Okay, so if this is perfection and this is death, this is where most people are. It's a range right here. And you know what that range is called? You know the way we refer to it is functional illness. You can get up, you can brush your teeth, put your shoes on, go to work. Do the things that you need to do in poor health. Functional illness. People tell me all the time, Dr. Osborne, I'm perfectly healthy. It's just the heart disease. You don't get to disclude heart disease and say you're perfectly healthy. Own it. You're not perfectly healthy. You're sick. And if you don't take it damn serious, no one else can take it more serious than you. Right? You can only love yourself the most. No one else can love you more than you. So it starts, this whole process, recognizing this, all starts with loving yourself. Self-respect. Love yourself enough to put real food in. Love yourself enough to understand that this is not okay. Right? And love yourself enough to forgive yourself when you had a day where you just couldn't get to it. But every day try to know and try to be better and try to do more. Autoimmunity is the perfect storm. Genes, immune regulation, environment. So there's certain sets of genes, we call them HLA-DQ genes. They're on chromosome 6, and they produce an antenna that sits on the surface of your white blood cells. This antenna, its job is to recognize good from bad and to tell the rest of the immune system what to attack and what not. And so there are certain gene patterns. When you have them, they predispose you if your behaviors are bad. They don't predispose you if your behaviors are good. So if you're gluten sensitive, for example, there are HLA-DQ genes that confer gluten sensitivity. This is what we look for when we're trying to identify whether or not somebody has gluten sensitivity. Gluten sensitivity is not a disease. That's another one you want to write down. It's not a disease. Gluten sensitivity is a state of genetics. If you have gluten-sensitive genes and you eat gluten, what are you doing? You're turning those genes on to produce an inflammation. If you don't eat gluten, you're turning those genes off. Having the genes doesn't make you sick, but having the genes and treating them incorrectly does. Immune dysregulation or immune regulation. This goes back to sunshine. You know that vitamin D deficiency all by itself can cause autoimmune disease? Yeah, it can cause rheumatoid arthritis, and it can cause type 1 diabetes. All by itself. Doesn't need any other triggers. And we've been told for the last 50 years to stay out of the sun. So again, the message I want you to take home is right here. Hope. The absence of hope, hopelessness, means there's nothing you can do. Genes don't make you sick. Subjecting your genes to the wrong environment does. You have the capacity to, one, educate yourself. That's why you're all here tonight. So everybody should give your neighbor just a pat on the back and say, good job. Seriously. How many people stayed home tonight that could have been here? Take action on what you learn. You know, knowledge without application is wasted. Right? You ever know the smartest guy in the room? And he knows everything? You know that guy or gal? Oh, I know it all. But they've never done any of it. They've never applied any of it. So they're out divvying advice, but they've never applied it themselves. You know, a lot of people have asked me tonight, because they brought books up, to sign for somebody else who was sick. And I think that's very noble. But the best thing you can do for somebody who is sick, the number one thing you can do for them, is to lead by example. Smokers smoke together. When one decides to quit, what do the other ones do? They don't like him anymore. Right? You know who your friends are? Like when you decide to try to get healthy, you really know who your friends are. No, I'm not kidding. The best thing that you can do is be a shining example of what you're talking about, because people will not listen if you're speaking about your expertise from a platform that doesn't show that you're an expert. Like, who wants to take advice from a bum, financial advice from a bum under a bridge? Right? Hey, what are the stocks I need today? Right? No. So who's going to take health advice, loving, meaningful health advice, from a person who's struggling all the time with poor health? So the number one thing that you can do is take action on what you learn and be a shining example. This is why I have a warrior mentality. Gluten-free warriors. Because you have to be a damn warrior in this world. Because you're fighting the engineering and the false belief patterns and a system that's not evil. It's not out to get you. It just evolved that way. And you have to recognize it. In order to overcome it, you have to be strong. You have to be different. Because in this world, to be normal means what? To be sick. To be normal means to be sick. Who wants to be normal? No, we'd like to be shining examples of health, right? So, let's talk a little bit about food and nutrition. So, nutrition and the immune system. Think of the immune system like an umbrella, and you've got all different parts of the immune system. These are just some of these things many of you may understand or have heard about. The skin, everybody's heard about the skin before. This stuff, right? It's the first line of defense. Thank you. If we didn't have skin, that's why when burn victims, when they burn their skin off, what happens? They're at risk for infection, right? So they've got to be on IV antibiotics in the hospital to keep them alive. The skin is the number one primary defense mechanism. Then you have mucosal immunity. How many of you have ever eaten something and you got drainage in the back of your throat? That's your mucosal immunity telling you that that food probably had something in it that's not very healthy for you. Dairy. And it's not dairy, because real dairy doesn't necessarily do that. But dairy that's full of pus and chlorine and pumped out of cows that have been genetically modified and fed genetically modified hormones and grains and penned in a dark room and stressed to the max, that's not good for you. It does not do a body good. Lysozymes, phagocytes, these are parts of white blood cells and elements within white blood cells. Immunoglobulins are proteins that you produce to defend yourself. Cell-mediated immunity, well, you have something called a natural killer cell, which is just like a sentry cell that floats around, and when it sees something, it zaps it. And then you have complement, which is a cascade of proteins that help to fight different types of infections and environmental toxins. And interferon, similar to complement, but different mechanisms. So you've got this umbrella of immune things, and you've got this storm above this umbrella. Things are always trying to come in. Always. This battle never ends. Your body is always working hard for you. So your resistance. Remember what I said? What was the word I used earlier? Resiliency is dependent on the health of these things. Well, what makes these things healthy? In part, nutrition. Look at this. This is straight out of the textbook of medical physiology, taught in all medical schools across the U.S. Each of the 100 trillion cells in the human being is a living structure that can survive indefinitely and in most circumstances and instances can even reproduce itself, provided its surrounding fluids contain appropriate nutrients. Vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, amino acids, essential fatty acids, appropriate nutrients. Now, I said earlier in 1943, the government banned the sale of processed grain because it didn't have what? Appropriate nutrients. To the degree it was killing people. This is not laughable. And any doctor who ever tries to tell you that it is, walk away. It's just not a good fit. In all of man's interventions in the natural order, none is accelerating quite so alarmingly as the creation of chemical compounds. However, there's a price to pay. An industrial society that has come to rely so heavily on chemicals, almost 35,000 of those in the U.S. are classified by the EPA as being either definitely or potentially hazardous to human health. You know, we have an EPA and we have regulations. We're probably the cleanest country in the world as it relates to that. I mean, for what we have in technology and convenience, you know, if you go to China, anybody ever been over to China or Hong Kong and tried to breathe that air? Right? So we do a really good job for all that's there, but it's something you have to understand. It's there. It is a problem. You have to protect yourself. Food additives. This is a history of the grass. Who knows what grass is? Not the stuff that cows eat. GRAS stands for generally recognized as safe. So Nixon, President Nixon, this was in 1969. Nixon, he basically says, we need to evaluate all these food ingredients that are going into food because we don't really know whether they're good or bad. So he basically creates this effort at trying to recognize what is and what is not safe. The problem that occurred is that we had this GRAS affirmation status process where most of the chemicals that had already had a history of being used for a decade or more, whether they were safe or not, got put on the GRAS list. Because we've been using them and nobody's dying, we're going to make them generally recognized as safe. Now, there's something in biochemistry called the law of synergism. It's in math that way, too. 1 + 1 equals... Okay. So that's summative math, right? So if we take one drug plus one drug, it does not equal 2. If we take one chemical and one chemical, it does not equal 2. It equals something exponential. Okay? When you mix chemicals, you get a synergistic blend of unreliable and unpredictable outcomes. You know, when drugs are approved by the FDA, the way they're approved is one disease, one drug. That's the way they're approved. So the person that you know, how many of you are in here, if you don't want to raise your hand and disclose this information, you don't have to, but if you do, please raise your hand. How many of you in here are on more than one medication? Okay. How many of you are on more than 5 medications? How many of you are on more than 10 medications? Okay, good. I had somebody this morning, they were on like 14. No kidding. Once you get past 1, you can't predict the interference in the interaction. There's no way to predict it, and there's no studies that show those predictions. So doctors are flying blind. They can say that drugs are FDA approved all they want, but they're not FDA approved to work together with multiple chronic diseases. They're designed to work one drug, one disease. And the same thing goes with food chemicals. So aside from the possibility of reacting to real food, which is a possibility, right? The FDA has approved 3,000 food additives, preservatives, and colorings. The average person ingests 150 pounds of additives every year. Now, the average person weighs 150 pounds. So imagine if I put on your plate today, eat up, it's dinner time. Clean your plate, there's starving kids in Africa, right? So many commonly eaten foods are genetically modified and contain genetically modified ingredients, which we don't really know the safety. There haven't been any good safety data. We are the study. You know, you volunteer to be the study if you eat these things. What's that? Frood. Oh, so frood is frankenfood. It's a little word I made up. I like to make up words. You see the way this apple's been stapled back together like Frankenstein? He's sharp. He caught it. I went right over it. You know, this was 2007. This was a decade ago. This is, you know, you go to the school lunchroom. I used to go out in my community, and I used to go to the school lunchroom, and I'd sit with the kids, and I'd just be an observer, because that's the kind of nerd I am. I'm a scientist. And, you know, this is kind of what you see. And you look at all these chemicals that they're being pumped into, and, the irony is Coca-Cola et al. Pay the school a hefty sum to brainwash and market to your kids. It's not about selling the sodas at the school. It's about normalizing that sodas are okay to drink every day. they're not making money off the sodas in the school. They're creating lifelong customers forever, right? And they're creating a social paradigm of change that makes it okay to kill yourself with toxic poison drinks. So if we don't stand up and say something about it, who will? Did you guys see the macaroni, Kraft macaroni? It was like a year ago. They put out this new commercial. And they said, and now we're going to take out the coloring and we're going to take out all the chemicals because we care. And I'm like, why in the were you putting it in there in the first place if you care? Who believes that? So herbicides, pesticides, steroids, hormones, antibiotics, and excitotoxins. Now, let me be clear. I'm going to back up a minute because we've got 300 million people to feed, right? So some side of that argument is, well, you know, Dr. Osborne, let's be realistic. You're not going to feed 300 million people with everybody having a garden in their front yard. And that's true. To a certain extent, that's true. But it has to start with knowledge. We have to start with knowing this so that we can figure out a different way. 5 to 8 pounds of chemically sprayed grain to produce 1 pound of beef. Now, I know that Dr. Campbell was here, and I'm not a vegetarian, and I truly do not believe that every person needs to be. There are some people that thrive on a vegetarian diet, and there are some that absolutely will wreck themselves on a vegetarian diet, and there are tests that can be run that can detect whether or not you should be on a plant-based diet or not. Okay? And it's the same thing with No Grain, No Pain. I wrote a book too. And No Grain, No Pain is not right for 100% of people. All doctors write books. Why? Because we have our observations and our scientific studies that show us patterns that if we educate the world about, we're going to reach out and we're going to help people that wouldn't otherwise have received that help. Right? So the fundamental premise of any platform of diet is the rule or the law of biochemical individuality. Everybody is uniquely different. So beef is not bad for us. Now that kind of beef is. Okay? And cows that are fed grain, where their meat is marbleized, and that marbleization in the meat is very rich in omega-6 fats, which are a creator, when they're imbalanced with your omega-3 fats, create a tendency towards inflammation and heart disease. So it's not beef that's bad for you. It's unhealthy beef that's bad for you. Does that make sense? So, on average, 1 glass of inorganic store-bought milk contains the residue of about 100 different antibiotics. Once in our bodies, these antibiotics impact the microbiome and subsequently disrupt the immune system, creating leaky gut. Or if we want to say it smartly, what's that word? What's that smart phrase? Intestinal hyperpermeability. Pesticides, 3 million tons. 3 million tons of pesticides are used each year worldwide. More than 1,600 chemicals are used in their production. Most have not been tested for their toxic effects on humans. The exposure of pesticides has been linked to autoimmune disease, nervous system disorders, immune system suppression, childhood cancer, breast cancer, diabetes, reproductive damage, hormone problems, asthma, ADD, migraines, and developmental delays. And that's the short list. Okay, let's talk a little bit about air. So our indoor environment is 2 to 5 times more toxic than our outdoor environment. And that's because of new building codes, and we have tighter doors and windows, tighter seals. We have carpets that are sprayed with bromine chemicals that are flame retardant, so they won't, when your house catches fire, it won't burn down, right? Mattresses that are sprayed with chemicals. You have volatile organic compounds in your paint. Look, we're not going to quit using those things. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier. We're not trying to be perfect. We're trying to be smart. We're trying to minimize our risk and minimize our exposure. But there's no such thing as living in a bubble and being successful, because you'll socially isolate yourself, and just that alone will create a state of illness. But we've got to be aware. So what can we do with our air quality? If we're not going to get rid of the mattresses and the carpet, what can we do? We can certainly put filtration in place, can't we? The best kind of filter, and I have a link in here in this slideshow that I'll send all of you tonight. I told you I would get that to you. It's called an ultrafine HEPA filter. Okay, it goes down to 0.3 microns, so it picks up the smallest of the small, and you should have one in your home. In some cases, air measurements indoors have been found to be 100 times more polluted. This is a direct quote from the EPA. So we got modern construction, VOCs, HVACs, aging buildings, office and school infrastructure ripe with mold. You get it all the time in Texas. Mold because of the hurricanes, mold because of the floods. It's a very, very big problem. Mold and yeast, by the way, are the same thing. Did you guys know that? A lot of people talk about candida, right? Candida overgrowth. Well, candida is mold. You can have mold living in you, on you, and outside of you, producing poisons that then you breathe inside of you. 24% of the population has a genetic susceptibility to mold toxins. That means, what do? We try to protect ourselves from it. EMF emissions. This is something that's becoming newer. Now we're going to these 5G emissions. It's getting ready to happen in many areas. They're going to 5G from 4G to 5G, and it's going to be even worse. This is going to become a bigger problem. I don't think this is the reason people get sick. I think it's one of the reasons they can't get healthy, but I don't think it's the main reason they're getting sick. I think it's a combination of all of these things. Then we have ozone and automobile exhaust and power plant emissions and gas vapor and solvents and sulfur dioxide and outdoor allergens. You know, our bodies are constantly, our umbrellas of our immune system are constantly going to war for us to protect us. And again, we have some of the best standards in the world as far as protecting from emissions and protecting from some of the environmental chemicals that are being released. However, it's still something we need to know about. So these things increase the risk of asthma, respiratory infections, lung cancer, and heavy metal exposure. Then there's the water quality. Just getting warmed up. There is hope, right? So what can we do? Simple solution, right? Simple solution here. What do we do with our water? We filter it. Because the job of the municipality that you live in, if you live in a city where the water is being piped to you, their job is not to pull the chemicals out of the water. Their job is to make sure that you don't get a Giardia infection. Their job is to make sure you don't get bacterial infection. Okay? They're keeping the bugs out of the water, and to do that, they need to use chlorine and chloramines and other things. It's how we prevent infectious disease, right? And infectious disease can kill a lot of people too. So it's, you know, it's a balancing act. It's a double-edged sword. So what you can do is filter the water when it comes into your home. One of the best forms of filtration for this is RO. Now, some people worry about RO because they think, okay, I'm pulling the minerals out of the RO. If you're eating real food, you don't have to worry about not getting minerals out of your water. It's the people that eat junk food that pay a price when they drink RO water because they're not getting any minerals from the food that they're eating. But if you're eating real food, look, water has very little minerals, right? So I've heard the argument that you should remineralize your water. I've heard the argument that you should alkalinize your water, and I've seen people get very, very sick over alkalinizing their water because then they can become too alkaline, and that's a problem too. So RO water is perfectly safe to drink, and it's one of the best ways to filter your water, and it's one of the most inexpensive ways to filter your water. You spend about $300 on a high-quality RO filter, put it under your sink, and you'll filter your water for a year. How many bottles of water or buckets of water could you buy at the store for $300? For your whole family, for about $300, you can have water that is bought and paid for the entire year. So RO filter is one of the best ways to do that. But tap water, if you're not filtering it, here's what you're getting. Microorganisms, heavy metals, agricultural runoff, pharmaceuticals. In Houston, there's 42 different prescription drugs in our water, including Viagra, antihypertensives, antipsychotics. Okay, filter your water. Household chemicals, lawn chemicals, gasoline, dry cleaning solvents, drugs, chlorine, fluoride, radioactive particles, lead, and other impurities. And many of these are known carcinogens, among other things. And remember what I said earlier? The law of synergism. 1 + 1 does not equal 2. Right? So you add all of this up and you get a synergism that is unpredictable. So the simple solution is filter it. Now let's talk about water. Chlorine was introduced to public drinking water in 1908. originally in Chicago, and it was used to eliminate waterborne disease such as cholera and typhoid fever. And widespread use of chlorine started in 1914. So when they figured out you could clean the water, you could stop typhoid and you could stop cholera. And that was a wonderful thing because people were getting very, very sick and dying. In the 1970s, it was discovered that chlorine, when added to water, some of the other components in the water, it would form trihalomethanes. And trihalomethanes increase the risk of cancer. This is why you want to filter your water. And the Brita pitcher won't work. It's not going to cut it. Okay, the cheap carbon they put in those things, not going to cut it. You need something robust. Fluoride. We consume way too much fluoride because it's in large quantities in municipal water supplies, toothpaste, mouthwash, and other products. Now, this is interesting. The U.S. Department, for the first time ever, plans to lower fluoride in drinking water. Why? Because the scientific evidence has been there for a really long time, and now they're finally going to do something about it. They can't take it away because taking it away would bring litigation. Taking it away would say, we were wrong and we're causing disease, and then the lawyers would swim around and there'd be blood in the water, right? So they're going to lower it instead. Studies show that fluoride is very damaging to the area of the brain that regulates reactions to stress, making humans easier to control. Hitler is known for using fluoride as an experiment in concentration camp prisoners. So, here's another chart. Rate of infectious diseases. Okay, so look at the year, 1900. Rate of infectious disease is very high, right? But then 1914 happens, and we have chlorination of the water. And boom, look what happened. This is World War II, by the way. So that's the reason for this, or not World War II, World War I. That's the reason for that spike. Okay? So 1914, we get chlorine, and the numbers dramatically drop. So you're around 600-fold, and you're dropping to about 400-fold. Now look what happens. Indoor plumbing. 1920 to 1930, centralized plumbing became common. Whoa. First use of penicillin came here. Not here. Not here. Came here after that. Rates were already hugely dropped. So 1941. And then we introduced the first vaccine, the Salk vaccine. It was here. Now, how many of you ever heard that vaccines are credited for reducing infectious disease? Not really. I'm not saying that vaccines have no effect, but look at the effect. Hygiene. Hygiene. More proof. Polio vaccine introduced. So look here. You see the timeline? Pure Food and Drug Act, 1906. 1914, chlorination in the water, indoor plumbing. Right? Here's polio. Came way down. This is when the vaccine was introduced. So we got a greater effect of lowering of polio spread through clean water, clean food, and plumbing. You know what people used to potty in, right? Cesspools. The term cesspool really has a meaning. Usually it was a pit that somebody dug out in the yard that everybody would go poop in and pee in, and it wouldn't be lined very well, so it'd leach into the groundwater, and we'd have spread of infection. And we'd have 15 people living in a one-bedroom home with no indoor central plumbing, sharing the same bathwater. This is how disease was spread, was through contact, right? Contact through touch, contact through food, contact through water. What I'm showing you is that water sanitation, food sanitation, and indoor plumbing dramatically reduced illness before the first vaccine was ever even invented or created. We have the same thing for pertussis. Same timeline. Same thing for measles. Measles was almost non-existent by the time the vaccine came around. You know who gets the measles the most? Vaccinated kids. No, it's a fact. So now I'm showing you two graphs side by side because this is infectious disease from 1950s, and if we go back to 1900 where it was over here, it just dropped, right? But look what happened over here from 1950. Autoimmune disease skyrocketed. And I told you there was one other mechanism of autoimmune disease, and I mentioned something called the hygiene hypothesis. And we're going to talk a little bit about that too tonight. So here's the wide use of antibiotics begins here. Okay. Then we have chemical use in the U.S. reaches 30,000, 1980. And we have vaccine liability was removed in 1986. Now, we're going to talk about that in just a minute, too, because it's very important that you understand that topic. But we also have this. Cesarean delivery increases from 20 to 33% by 2011, while vaccine schedule increases from 7-fold from 1983 to 2016. So all these things are happening. And some people will say, Dr. Osborne, correlation is not causation. No, it isn't, but we have to look at these things. We have to analyze and we have to research these things. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So infections and autoimmune disease. How many of you know that one of the triggers for autoimmune disease is infection? And these are examples, okay? The Coxsackie virus can cause myocarditis, which is a form of autoimmune heart disease. Streptococcus can cause heart inflammation, which is a form of autoimmune inflammation. Trypanosoma can cause cardiomyopathy. Borrelia burgdorferi can cause arthritis and myelitis. Now, how many of you who've had heart disease have ever had your doctor test for any of these things? No. It's not standard of care. E. coli, uveitis, that's inflammation of the eye. Campylobacter, GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's a form of autoimmune ascending paralysis of the nervous system. Chlamydia, multiple sclerosis. Clostridium difficile, ulcerative colitis. Epstein-Barr, Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, Candida, mycotoxins, Enterobacter, all known triggers for autoimmune disease. Now, how many of you in here, we said earlier, how many of you have autoimmune disease? Raise your hand. Keep it really high for me. Get it really high. I want to just get everybody here. Okay. Now, keep your hand up. Everybody look at this. Keep your hand up if your doctor's tested you for any of these things. Interesting. We have maybe one hand. So if you look here, viruses, bacteria, and other infectious pathogens are thought to play a major role in the development of autoimmune disease. Here's a research study linking even more. And again, I'll have this slide for you guys. But this is a major study that pulled data from hundreds of studies to show the connection between autoimmune and infection. Then we have mycotoxins, which are not alive. Mycotoxins are mold poop. Okay? So they're not living structures. You can't kill a mycotoxin. You can only detox from it. You can only get it out of you, but you can't kill it. Pro-inflammatory effects of an environmentally relevant dose of aflatoxin B1, which is a form of mycotoxin, on the central nervous system-derived cells in vitro could potentially explain the immune dysregulation in neurodegenerative disorders. You know how many cases of multiple sclerosis there are in the southern Gulf area as a result of mold poisoning from mycotoxins? And mycotoxins aren't just limited to outside of your body from mold in your home. Mycotoxins are found in peanuts and corn and wheat. It's one of the things I wrote about in No Grain, No Pain. And one of the reasons why grain is so toxic is because the high levels of mycotoxins and the government doesn't regulate it tightly enough. So mycotoxins make it into your food supply, into your children's cereal box, but guess what we feed our animals? We feed our animals even lower quality of grain than we feed our humans. So our animals, we get mycotoxins, and those things can show up in their meat. And so we go back to that. That's why it's so important if you're a meat eater to eat grass-fed free range. Okay, so that you're not eating the stuff that they're being poisoned with. Aflatoxins, highly hazardous fungal biometabolites usually present in feeds and foods. Our findings open a new door to understanding the molecular mechanisms and functional consequences in inducing immunodysregulation, immunotoxicity, and thus non-infectious disease in humans. Immunotoxicity and immunodeficiency or immunodysregulation is just a fancier way of saying autoimmune disease. Then we have medical intervention. Did you know this? This is really what got me started on my path to questioning. When I was in the VA, I told you about when I was in the VA hospital, but there was a study put out by Lazarou. It was published in the Journal of American Medical Association. And it was a study done in, I think it was 1996. And the outcome was that 108,000 or 106,000, I don't remember which, so don't quote me on it, but it was like 106,000 deaths per year were caused by the proper prescriptions, not by medical errors, not by, oops, we gave you too much or the wrong thing, but deaths by the proper prescription. And the authors of that study said we're probably way underestimating it. And then this was published about almost 2 years ago now from the British Medical Journal, and they calculated that medical error is the third leading cause of death. So think about this. If you have heart disease, how do we treat it? If you have cancer, how do we treat it? If we have COPD, how do we treat it? Does that make sense? Is that a sustainable model? And this goes back to doing this to these things and expecting cures or expecting good outcomes is insanity. It's insanity. And it's gotten to a point where the greed and the lack of education and the corruption in the education system has gone on too long and it's gone too far. This is a major problem. Look at prescription painkiller sales and deaths. The curves correlate. Drugs that cause gut dysfunction. This is just a whole other topic. I could spend a week just talking about this one thing. Some drugs alter taste and smell. What happens when you can't taste your food? What do you put on it? What if you have heart disease? Right? But people with heart disease, they've been on blood pressure medicines, right? And blood pressure medicines cause zinc deficiency. And zinc is necessary for taste buds to work. So when you're taking blood pressure medications, you're blunting your taste buds to salt your food more, and salt drives up your blood pressure. Are you winning in that war? No. But look at all the different potential effects. We've got drugs that can affect how you make saliva, drugs that dry your mouth out. Anybody ever been on pain medication? We got drugs that slow down your motility. We got drugs that speed up your motility. We got drugs that kill off your microbiome. We've got drugs that are poisonous to your pancreas. We've got drugs that are poisonous to your liver. Your liver makes bile. How do we absorb and digest fat? Bile. Everybody talks about how bad fat is, but did you know that vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K are fat? Omega-3 is fat. So if you're pumping 10 drugs or 5 drugs through your liver, how effective do you think it's going to be at helping you digest your fat? And fat malabsorption, one of the biggest diseases caused by fat malabsorption is cancer. Because vitamin A is one of the most powerful anti-cancer agents that your body has. There's a process for cancer called apoptosis, which is a fancy way of saying programmed cell death. It's how your body can tell cancer cells to kill themselves, and that mechanism requires vitamin A. And we can't absorb vitamin A if our liver's damaged. So I'm not going to harp too much on this slide, but I've got all the references down here, and I'll give that to you. What about this? Common medications prescribed for the treatment of autoimmune disease cause vitamin and mineral deficiencies that can hinder the immune system. So this is not even the part about it's affecting your gut. This is the part about it's actually causing you not to be able to use the vitamins and minerals that are in the food that you're trying to eat. For example, steroids cause calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, and vitamin C depletion. Now, let's think about that from just this perspective right here. Vitamin C is necessary to form collagen. Collagen is the backbone for cartilage. If I'm taking a steroid for cartilage degradation or pain, joint pain, boom. Now, let's take this a different direction. Let's say my child is on a steroid inhaler. Little Johnny's got asthma. What little Johnny really has is probably a dairy and a gluten problem, but little Johnny's got asthma. And so little Johnny's been doing this every day to control his asthma on the playground. I don't know why he always gets sick. I don't have any idea why he always gets sick. Why does he always get sick, Doc? Well, we'll just put him on another antibiotic. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, Celebrex. Deplete vitamin C, iron, and folate. Here's another list of just common drug-induced nutritional deficiencies. Blood pressure medications, B1, B6, vitamin C, magnesium, calcium, potassium, zinc, sodium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, CoQ10, melatonin. Cholesterol medications, vitamin D and CoQ10. Older cholesterol medications, so if you're going with the safer bet, the fibrates, vitamin B2, vitamin B6, vitamin B12, folate, A, D, E, K, beta-carotene, vitamin B12, folate, and iron. Diabetic medications cause vitamin B12 deficiency. You know what vitamin B12 deficiency causes? Neuropathy. You ever heard of a diabetic neuropathy? Is it a diabetic neuropathy or is it a glucophage neuropathy? Non-steroidals, we talked about those. Heartburn, acid reflux, B12, beta-carotene, vitamin D, B12, folic acid, calcium, iron, zinc, protein. Blocking stomach acid suppresses protein absorption. Suppressing protein absorption suppresses your immune system's ability to produce antibodies to fight your environment for you. This is why people hear, the commercials just make me sick. The guy with the big Pete's and he's like, I just got to be me. And he's just killing himself. But he's got the pink bottle. That's the society that is accepting of that, right? This is why we have to be a warrior. This is why we have to battle that mindset. Because it's killing him. Hormone replacement. How many of you women knew that birth control pills and estrogen cause B2, B3, B6, B12, C, and folate deficiencies? A lack of them causes pregnancy? I like that. So some women would say, get your stuff snipped. And some men would say, I don't know, I'm not going to do that. And then some women would say, well then we're not going to have any more fun time. So damage caused by drugs that treat autoimmunity. Okay, so liver injury with drugs used for multiple sclerosis is a very common problem. And this goes back to what I was talking about when I was in the VA hospital. The drugs used to treat the disease actually ended up creating disease. And it was new disease. It was disease that didn't exist before we used the medication. And it's just, to me, it's just not acceptable. So drug-induced, this DILI right here, that's drug-induced liver injury, might be a common feature of MS drugs and a call for a formal awareness by clinicians who should assess the possible responsibility of MS drugs when they diagnose drug-induced liver damage. Tumor necrosis factor alpha inhibitors. These are your common medications that are used in treating painful autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, associated with nearly a twofold increase in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which can kill you. Medicines can also cause autoimmune disease. So not only if you're being treated with a medicine for your autoimmune disease, it can cause damage and nutritional deficiency that can lead to autoimmune disease, but medicines can cause autoimmune disease by themselves. Any of you who have ever had breast cancer that were put on like tamoxifen or an aromatase inhibitor, oncologists should be aware of the potential development of autoimmune reactions in breast cancer patients treated with aromatase inhibitors. Here's a list of drugs that cause lupus. It's a pretty big list. Look here. You know, how many people that are on statins complain of pain? You know, the sad part is I wasn't formally trained in medicine, and I know these things. But many of the doctors who were formally trained in medicine don't. Drug-induced lupus. So it's actually lupus is one of the most common autoimmune disease caused by drugs. Olmesartan. Remember I told you earlier I was going to tell you a little bit more about blood pressure medications causing celiac disease? Yeah. Angiotensin receptor blocker, olmesartan, okay, cause celiac disease. There was an original case report, and then they did some more research, and they found, yep, that family, that class of drugs can cause celiac sprue. Silicone breast implants. Now that's medical intervention, isn't it? Because doctors have to, medically implant that. But breast implants linked to autoimmune, rheumatic disease, associated in a proportion of patients with complaints such as fatigue, cognitive impairment, arthralgias, myalgias, that's joint pain, muscle pain, pyrexia, dry eyes, dry mouth. Silicones can migrate from the implant through the body and induce chronic inflammatory process. So even the safe breast implants. Undifferentiated connective tissue disease is a form of autoimmunity. Okay. Adjuvants, vaccines, metal implants. How many of you have ever had a surgical metal implant? Proximity to metal factories and foundries where you can get heavy metal exposure. Asia. Who's heard of Asia? Not the country or the continent. Asia stands for autoimmune inflammatory syndrome induced by adjuvants. It's a real thing. So, almost all types of vaccines have been reported to be associated with the onset of Asia. Almost all. See, the thing about this is I know that there have been some disease reduction through vaccination. And so I'm not 100% against it all. But I am 100% against not giving informed consent to the person who's trying to make the decision about whether they're going to inject their 1-year-old child who can't say, I hurt. And the only way they can say it is to cry. And then to have a damn pediatrician say, oh, it's not the vaccine. And then the child ends up with Asperger's or autistic disorder or some form of autoimmunity. Association of vaccines with autoimmune disease. Influenza, Guillain-Barré syndrome. The meningococcal vaccine, Guillain-Barré syndrome. Hepatitis B, multiple sclerosis, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. Hepatitis, insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus, so type 1 diabetes. Inflammatory bowel disease, vasculitis, and SLE, lupus. MMR vaccine, which is idiopathic thrombocytic purpura, which is a platelet-like disorder. It's an autoimmune platelet disorder. And then you got hepatitis A and B, macrophagic myofasciitis. This isn't made up. Like the people that are out there that are saying, my kid got hurt or I got hurt from the vaccine, they're not crazy. They're not anti-vaxxers. They're the people who had the perfect storm brewing, and the vaccine was the proverbial camel or the straw that broke the camel's back. So we have to take this stuff seriously. And informed consent should be a part of what happens with vaccines. I told you I was going to talk a little bit more about this. 1983, 5 doses of vaccines by 12 months of age. In 2016, 24 doses by 12 months of age. Now, in 1986, the U.S. government said that vaccine manufacturers can no longer be held liable for vaccine damage. Did you guys know that? Some of you did. You can't sue a vaccine manufacturer. There's no recourse. Zero. Vaccine is one of the most profitable drugs in the world. And now that there's no recourse, what do you think the pharmacy companies are going to do? You know, my neighbor's a pediatrician, so I have this at least a little bit firsthand. His number one profit center is childhood vaccines. See, unlike other medications, there's really only 2 areas in medicine where the doctor directly profits from dispensing the medicine. One is in cancer, and the other is with vaccines. And companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield will give $20,000 and $60,000 rewards to doctors who achieve high levels of vaccinations in their patient base. So they're highly, highly, highly incentivized to vaccinate before the age of 2 when a child can't speak for themselves. And you got some states, like the great state of California, that don't want to look at this and that want to take away your right to be informed and make intelligent decisions about the people you brought into this world who you have every right to protect. 2016, 69 total doses. 1983, 24 total doses. Where's the science that says that this is safe? There isn't any. It doesn't exist. (1986) vaccine liability removed. The numbers climb. Look at this one. Skyrockets. Great man, Ignaz Semmelweis. He's known to or referred to as the savior of mothers. And the reason why he's noted as the savior of mothers is because he noticed that when he washed his hands, the mothers who he was delivering babies for didn't die. You see, in this time, he was a Hungarian in Vienna, in Germany. And during this time, mortality rates at birth were 10%. So 1 out of 10 women would die giving birth. And one of the reasons why the mortality rate was so high is because at the time, doctors would work in the morgue without gloves. And so they'd be playing around in cadavers. And then they would go across the street, and then they would deliver a baby. And what they would do, what they were doing is transferring, bacteria. They were transferring infection, creating puerperal fever. This was purely a medically induced problem. So when he washed his hands, the birth-death rate went from 10% to under 1%. He died being laughed at. We didn't have the internet then. We didn't have instant communication. He died a broken man. But we can recognize that he invented hand washing, which was the founding of hygiene, right? And doctors like Louis Pasteur and Lister, the surgeon who sterilized his surgical equipment and reduced infectious rates in surgery, all that came as a result of discovering that cleanliness is godliness. So we were talking about water earlier. 1820, water and wastewater were managed by private privy and cesspools. In 1820, less than 5% of the U.S. population lived in urban areas. That means 95% of the U.S. lived in the country. Okay? From 1820 to 1880, population boom along with urban development led to infrastructure issues around hygiene, clean water, sewage, living in close quarters. We saw a massive shift and increased infectious diseases. 1854, John Snow discovers water contamination leads to disease transmission. So he slowly begins to build and recognize the need for water treatment facilities. In 1885, Louis Pasteur proves the germ theory of disease. So now we have an enemy in germs. By 1914, the Department of Treasury enacted a set of standards effectively requiring drinking water disinfection and leading to a dramatic increase in the use of drinking water chlorination by treatment plants. Then in the 1920s, new home construction implements standard indoor plumbing with bathrooms. 1943, the use of antibiotics begins on a large scale during World War II. By 1948, we have the Federal Water Pollution Control Act. 1951, U.S. Public Health Service adopts fluoridation. 1970, EPA was formed. So it's kind of your history. And the reason I share this history with you is for the hygiene hypothesis. I want to explain what that is. See, understand that germs and discovering that germs could transmit disease was one of the greatest discoveries in human history. But we've taken it too far. And that's what the hygiene hypothesis is. See, no bugs is a bad thing. Too many bugs is a bad thing. It's kind of like all things in life, right? You hear that term, moderation, right? All things are moderation. So too many bugs equals infectious disease. Not enough bugs equals autoimmune disease. When your immune system doesn't have any bugs to talk to and help train, think of your immune system as soldiers. When they sit on a hammock all day, fat and lazy, and then a war happens, I don't know what to do. I haven't trained for it. And that's what too much hygiene creates. Too much hygiene also creates superbugs. Too many antibiotics, too much hand washing. You know the Purell soap dispensers? We did a research study on Purell once. We took the Purell and we washed everybody's hands with Purell. And then we had them put their hands into agar plates to see if we could culture and grow bacteria. Everyone that washed their hands with Purell, we culture bacteria. It doesn't work. It dries out your hands, and it basically strips the oil. And the oil, by the way, is part of your innate immune system that protects you from infection. So all those nurses that have to go every time they go into a room and they come out of the room and they're this, and their hands are like scaled and red around the edges because they're in the name of being clean and germ-free. So the hygiene hypothesis, again, is not being dirty enough. People need to play in the dirt sometimes. You don't need to wash your hands with every move you make. Now, you should wash your hands if like I'm going to go home and wash my hands, right? When you're in public places with this many people, yes, hygiene is a good practice to follow. But if you're at home, how many of you shower every day? See, it's one of the causes. It's one of the contributing factors to chronic illness. It is. Too much hygiene. You strip away the oils off of your skin. You subject yourself. How many of you that shower every day filter your shower water? Not very many hands went up. So you're being exposed, your skin's being exposed to the 42 different prescription medications, to all the different chemicals in the water. Some people shower twice a day. So I'm not saying not to shower, and I'm not saying not to wash your hands. But what I'm saying is a degree of common sense needs to go into it because we've gotten too clean, and being too clean creates illness. So again, rate of infectious disease declined after chlorination. This is cleanliness, right? We took it all the way to this point. The cleanliness, the plumbing, the hand washing, the antibiotics, okay? And then at this point, so we lost infectious disease, but we gained autoimmunity. That's what I mean. It's a double-edged sword. And you have to know both so that you can protect yourself from both sides of this equation. So here's a quote published in the Journal of Pediatrics. In conclusion, the largest historical decrease in morbidity and mortality caused by infectious disease was experienced not with the modern antibiotic and vaccine era, but after the introduction of clean water and effective sewer systems. We've shown you these slides. Are you guys tired? You getting tired? You want me to speed it up? No. Okay. I hear a low murmur. All right. So, sunshine. Significantly low levels of D were documented in patients with autoimmune disease that were related to the presence of antithyroid antibodies and abnormal thyroid function tests, suggesting the involvement of vitamin D in the pathogenesis of autoimmune thyroid disease and the advisability of supplementation. Supplementation or sunshine? Like, which is a better source of vitamin D? Yeah. Let's reverse that policy. Evidence linking sunlight, vitamin D, and the risk of multiple sclerosis and type 1 diabetes is summarized to develop the thesis that vitamin D is the environmental factor that most strongly influences autoimmune disease development. Remember I told you earlier on that slide? That's why vitamin D was on that slide. Melatonin. We also get from sunshine, we get this substance. It's one of the most potent anti-cancer hormones that we can produce. Produces the ability to modulate immune response by regulation of T helper 1 and 2 cells and the balance of T helper. You guys know what T helper cells are? They're the cells that kind of balance the difference between chronic disease and allergies. Lack of sleep. Subclinical shifts in basal inflammatory cytokines are known to be associated with the future development of metabolic syndrome disease in healthy asymptomatic individuals who don't get enough sleep. Not getting enough sleep can cause blood-brain barrier disruption, leaky brain. Okay? They don't know why, but they know that it does. That's it. We don't know how, but we know it does. We have theories. Induces a systemic, low-grade inflammatory characterized by the release of several molecules like cytokines, chemokines, and acute phase proteins. Okay. Exercise and activity are greatly diminished in our convenience-based society. I said earlier, kids go to school and sit all day, and when they graduate regular school, they go off to college and sit all day, and when they graduate college, they go off to work and sit all day, right? So they sit in school. The adults sit at work. Manual labor jobs are outsourced by technology. 50 to 60% of Americans are overweight, and the aging population are instructed to take it easy. So these are studies on how moving can diminish autoimmune symptoms. Very simply put, exercise reduces the symptoms of RA, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and inflammatory bowel disease, as well as psoriasis. Obesity worsens the course of rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, irritable or inflammatory bowel disease, psoriasis, and psoriatic arthritis, and impairs the treatment response of these diseases as well, so they don't respond as well to treatment. So obesity appears to play a major environmental factor contributing to the onset and progression of autoimmune disease. Understand this. Obesity is an inflammatory disorder, period. End of story. Unless you're an Inuit and you eat a 90% whale fat diet and you live in cold northern temperatures where your body has evolved over 100,000 years to sustain those temperatures through a high-fat diet, obesity is an inflammatory disease, period. So, stress. Stress can be chemical, physical, and emotional, and the body cannot tell the difference. So if you're stressed out because you have a boss at work that's writing you all day, if you're stressed out because you got in a fight with your spouse, or if you're stressed out because you've exercised too much, that stress has the same effect biochemically on your body. So chemical, emotional, and physical stressors all are equal in terms of your body size. Now, all of these things can be chemical, physical, and emotional stressors. So this goes back to we're not trying for perfect. We're not trying to be in a bubble, but we're trying to do better every day. We're trying to understand what we need to do, what our body needs, how our body's going to respond to our behaviors. That is the goal. Now I'm going to open the floor for questions. Did I talk right through questions? I'll stay over here if anybody, or even outside in the parking lot if somebody wants to. You do more of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I need my phone, and I'm going to tell you guys what to text to. Thank you. Okay. So, if you want a copy of the slides, you can text to 44222. 44222. That's the number you're going to text to. You're going to text the phrase AIR, A-I-R, 2018. AIR 2018. For those of you that don't know, AIR stands for Autoimmune Revolution, and that's what we're creating. And for those of you who want to learn more about Autoimmune Revolution, you can go to autoimmunerevolution.org, and right now, this week, you can watch for free 35 hours of interviews of some of the world's leading experts in autoimmune disease as a gift. Those are interviews that I personally did with some of the world leading experts. So that's there. If you go to autoimmunerevolution.org, all you have to do, put your name and your email in, and you're going to get access to those days of talks. Is there a question back there? Yes. It just depends on your mobile. We're not charging you anything. There's no fee, but some people's mobile service, when they text, charges them. I just don't know what yours is. But no, we're not charging anything. Yes?